Citizen detectives, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. You guys know what time it is. It's time to talk about Yellowjackets once again. This is going to be my Season 3, Episode 9, spoiler, review, breakdown, recap. The episode is titled How the Story Ends. Again, this is going to have spoilers in it, so if you guys haven't seen the episode, make sure you watch that before you come back here. Otherwise, if you don't care about spoilers, then feel free to continue watching the video. If this is your first time watching one of my videos, I want to say thank you guys so much for clicking on the video and watching it. It means a lot. And if you are new, hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it. That way you guys get notifications for all my new videos. I've been covering Season 3, covered Season 2, and I did most of, or like half of, I think, of Season 1. And then I have a bunch of Yellowjackets interviews with different cast members, so make sure to check those out. And before we get into the video, I wanted to show you guys something I just recently got in the mail. It came in like right after I did last week's episode, so I was like, God damn it. So I figured I would just show it quick this week to you guys. So this was from Fright Rags. It was a pre-order, so I don't know if it's available, unfortunately, anymore, but it's this little Yellowjacket. So it comes in this drawstring bag, which I thought was really fun. It was this little bundle that they had put together. So you get this drawstring bag here. Go ahead and open this up for you guys. And then, so it comes with a t-shirt it says, you know, the high school, 1996. So I got that. I thought the t-shirt looked really nice. Can't have enough Yellowjackets memorabilia. You guys see my jacket. I got a couple of different shirts. So then you have this little thing right here. I don't know if you guys can see that. It says Yellowjackets with Showtime on it. Then comes with a little Yellowjackets water bottle on the front, WHS 1996, and then on the back just has it 96 with Yellowjackets down below. So thought this was really cool. And then you get a little whistle as well. So yeah, I just wanted to show that to you guys. I thought that a lot of you guys who watch my Yellowjacket stuff would appreciate that. Like I said, I don't know if it's available anymore. I think it was a pre-order, so once they sold it, it might be sold out. But give it a go to frightrags.com and see if they have any more left. But now, without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about Episode 9, because there is a lot to talk about as we're just about to get the final episode next week. So the episode opens up. We have Van. She wakes up at the hospital and she sees her younger self there. Her younger self tells her that Shauna left, but Tai and Misty are still there. And then she says, I have a really important question for you. Do you remember the Goonies? And of course, Older looks at her and says, I've seen that movie 100 times more than you. Of course I do. So then young Van, she ends up saying it's a classic hero story. X marks the spot. Ty's been trying to show her, so please listen to her because Tai needs this too. And so then at that point, Van, she ends up waking up. And when she wakes up, she sees Tai there with her. She's crying and she looks at her and says, it's time to go. Goonies never say die, which is a classic line if you guys have seen that movie. And then from there, we go to where Episode 8 ended off, where we see Shauna and Melissa. Shauna telling Melissa to eat her own skin, or else she's going to tell her family about her secrets. And then at that point, she eats it, but she ends up spitting it right back into Shauna's face, ends up knocking her off, and she's able to escape, runs out to her van, gets in there and drives off. But then you notice that she's almost out of gas, and then we get the intro of the episode. After the intro of the episode, we end up going to the 90s timeline where we see Nat and Shauna facing off, and as that's going on, you see a couple of the others talking. Lottie says, you'll see this is the right decision. Travis says, we've literally been living in hell, and then Tai jumps in and says, no one's telling you guys that we have to stay here forever, but is that really the case? And then Kodi has a great line where he says, have fun braiding each other's hair and partaking in some light cannibalism, and says he's going to leave until Shauna threatens to shoot him. And so they end up taking Kodi and Hannah and putting them in the animal pit. And we all know, we've all seen how that works out. Then we go over to Van and Tai, who are having a conversation where Van asks Tai, she says, did you really mean that you'll eventually want to go back? And Tai says, did you see how the frog scientists, they freaked out when they saw everything that was going on here? What's the point in going back if it's going to ruin all of our lives? And Van responds to that by saying, she's just, pleading with her and basically says, last winter we ended up having to eat a kid, and how do you think that's going to go this time? But Tai says, oh, we're prepared this time. And I don't know, are you really though? From there, then we end up going into the modern day where we see Tai, Van, and Misty. They're driving, they're heading to Alex's house when all of a sudden they see a car stopped on the side of the road, and Misty recognizes Melissa, and so they turn the car around, start going after Melissa. Tai ends up try slide tackling her, which I thought was a fun little throwback there. And they eventually end up getting her. As soon as this is all happening, Van sees a railroad crossing sign. X marks the spot. It seems like every time they either go more the route where I think, oh, this is more all in their heads, all trauma-based, or it's more along the supernatural route, they do something to make me reconsider that, and this is one of those cases, and not the case in this episode as well. And as they're driving, Melissa ends up telling them what Shauna did to her after admitting that she was the one who sent the tape. And so they're like, all right, we got to find Shauna. But Melissa, she doesn't want anything to do with that. But as she threatens to try and get out of there, Van says, if you leave, we'll actually end up killing you. Then in the 90s timeline, we see Travis, and he is building the pit. He's putting all the branches together, and then he ends up throwing this big log onto it to test it. And so we get to actually see the spikes in there. And I just thought it was really interesting that, I mean, the pit itself was there, but him putting the spikes in and then putting all that stuff on top, I just thought that was really interesting that Travis was the one who's doing it. What are your guesses for Pit Girl? I might do a separate video just kind of breaking that down so we can put all of our predictions there, but who do you guys think it's going to be? After that, then we end up going to Shauna, who sees some of the girls talking. It's Nat, Mari, Jen, and Akila, I believe, and she sees them talking, and so she goes to the people that are kind of following her and says, I think that they're up to something. So once again, well, I should say this is in the 90s timeline, but we have Shauna's paranoia starting to show up again, just like it is in the modern day. And then we see Misty. She says, well, hey guys, I can be a double agent and try and get more information. From there, then we jump back into the modern day again, where we see Shauna at Alex's house. She's trying to clean up the mess that she made, and as she's doing that, Tai, Van, Misty, and Melissa end up arriving at the house, and once they get inside, Shauna says that Melissa was the one who killed Lottie, but Misty says, well, wait a second, your DNA was under Lottie's fingernails, and you were also in New York City at the time. So Shauna says that she was in New York City to get a cap, but none of them are really buying that excuse. And then she explains all the different things that Melissa also did to her, one of those things being the freezer. But then at that moment, Misty jumps in and says, oh, for Christ's sakes, the reason that happened to you was because of me. I didn't technically do it, but the lock hasn't been working, and I just didn't tell you about it because you have been an asshole to me for a while now. So then at that point, Tai eventually she steps in and says, hey, we need to try and figure this thing out. And Misty kind of thinks that as her taking Shauna's side, which I thought was an interesting parallel considering what's going on in the 90s timeline as well. And so at that point, Misty says, all right, I'm leaving. I'm going to figure things out on my own, and I'm done cleaning up Shauna's mess, which I don't blame her at all. We then go back into the 90s timeline where we see Travis. He goes up to Lottie and says, hey, can I talk to you in the woods? Then from there, we go to Nat, Akila, Jen, and Mari. They're talking about how they have to get out of here before winter, but Akila speaks up and says, if we are still here by winter time, then I hope the wilderness chooses me first. And I really hope that this isn't some foreshadowing. Because like I said, I don't want to lose Akila, even though I know we haven't seen an adult version of her up to this point, so I feel like we are probably going to lose her at some point. But yeah, like, no, stop it. We then jump back into the modern day where we see Jeff. He ends up walking into seeing Callie smoking some weed. He tells her that the Joels actually ended up offering him the position, and then he hints that he wants to smoke some of that weed with Callie. From there, then we jump over to Misty. She's out in, it seemed like the middle of nowhere, and then all of a sudden, Walter comes down in a fucking helicopter. I was like, what is going on right now? Then we end up jumping back into the 90s timeline again where we see Misty. She comes over to Mari, Jen, and Akila. They're talking and she's trying to get information from them, but Mari calls her out and says, we saw you talking to that other group. We're not stupid. But as Misty gets ready to leave, she makes it seem like she might know a way to get out of here. And then Misty ends up seeing Van. She goes to the plane, grabs some wires, and then all of a sudden she goes to this tree and pulls out the phone that the prong scientists were using, and so looks like she's trying to fix it. Then we go back into the modern timeline again where we see Tai. She's tying up Melissa, and as that's going on, Tai says to Shauna this kind of feels similar to the whole Adam situation, which kind of freaks Melissa out because this has happened before, but then Shauna, she points out that Melissa married Hannah's daughter, which the others didn't know about. And so they end up telling Melissa to sit down in front of the fireplace, and she does, but as the others go into the room, we see that she's trying to escape, obviously. From there, then we end up going to the 90s timeline where we see Melissa and Hannah talking, and Melissa asks Hannah what's going on in the real world, and she says, I don't know, it's mostly Nickelodeon out of my house nowadays because of my kid. And so my question for you guys, because growing up in the 90s, Nickelodeon was a huge staple in my house, so what were some of your favorite Nickelodeon shows back in the day? For me, Hey Arnold's definitely up there. I loved Kenan and Kel. That was one of my favorite shows. Are You Afraid of the Dark? So I definitely want to hear what some of your favorites were down below. And do you guys think that Hannah was just using Melissa to try and escape, or is there a genuine connection there? I think it's kind of more along the lines of a genuine connection, just because of the fact that she ends up asking Melissa to get the tape to her daughter, but want to hear your guys' thoughts on that as well. And as that's happening, you see Shauna, she comes over and sees this, and she doesn't like what she sees. She says, I can't believe you'd be that dumb to get close to her. And Melissa tries to explain herself, but Shauna just jumps in and says, I can't believe you'd do something this stupid. And you can just tell that that really hurts Melissa here. And so Melissa gets ready to leave, and Shauna says to her, no one gave a shit about you until me. And at that point, Melissa just turns around and looks at her and says, why can't you be a nice person? And for real, chill, Shauna, Jesus Christ. And then at that point, Melissa kind of makes a mistake here. She looks at the rest of the girls and says how Shauna is nuts. And at that point, Shauna pulls out her gun. Looks like she's getting ready to shoot her. And Melissa says, I fucking dare you. And I was like, oh man, you are pushing your luck here, girl. And sure enough, she does. It's kind of a warning shot. She shoots her, and it puts a little hole in her clothing. And then at that point, Melissa ends up pissing herself. So fucked up. That was uncalled for, Shauna. Come on now. Then we end up going to Travis and Lottie in the woods. And as they're walking along, Travis ends up telling Lottie how she's ruining their chance of being rescued. But Lottie looks at him and says, I just wanted to let you know that Hadi is out here with us. And then all of a sudden you see the wind blowing. And then at that point, Lottie, she steps right where the pit trap is, walks on all those branches that fell before when the big log was thrown onto it. She walks along it, nothing happens. And so was that the wilderness protecting her? Again, so another element that where just when you think the show is going more, this is all kind of trauma based, they throw in an element like this that makes you question, is there actually a supernatural element here though? After that, we end up seeing Mari. She takes Hannah out into the woods, and when they get to a certain point, all of a sudden Nat ends up coming out, and she ends up giving a knife to Hannah and says, I'm not going to hurt you. When it gets to nighttime, cut you and Kodi loose, and then we'll make a run for it. We go into the modern day where we get a little father-daughter bonding moment here where we see Callie and Jeff. They're smoking the weed from earlier, and as they're doing that, all of a sudden Callie asks her father, did you mean what you were saying to the Joels earlier about mom? And at first he says no, and Callie responds and says, it's okay if you do. And then at that point, Jeff, he just ends up breaking down and says how it's hard being married, but especially being married to her mom, it's just really lonely. Again, God, I feel so bad for Jeff in this season. He deserves better. Then we go back into the 90s timeline again where we see it's nighttime, and all of a sudden Melissa ends up showing up to Jen's hut and says, fuck Shauna, I want in on whatever's going on at this point. And then we see Misty. She has a piece of what Van was working with earlier from the site with the phone and everything. Then we go over to Kodi, who tells Hannah to cut him loose, but at that point Hannah looks at him and says, who's Eric Chung? Because that was the name that was on the rucksack that he had, and he says, I don't know, I just got it from a thrift store. Do you guys believe him? And then at that point we see Shauna. She ends up waking up. She catches them just as they're getting ready, or they're untying themselves, and she says, who gave you the knife? And at that point Hannah says, Kodi's the one who got it. And all of a sudden she turns around, stabs Kodi in the eyeball. He's dead. Rest in peace, Kodi. And Hannah says how she wants to be a part of this. Now, obviously, I'm thinking that she's just doing this because she's trying to survive. But do you guys have any other thoughts? Has she kind of been influenced by the wilderness or something else? Leave your thoughts down below. From there, we end up going to the modern day where we go to Walter's place, and him and Misty are sitting there. and Misty asks him and says, do you think that we could have been wrong about Shauna being the one who killed Lottie? And he responds and says no, because her DNA was under her fingernails. But Misty says that she actually called the Humane Society and found out that Shauna was actually there to pick up a cat, and so her story does check out. And Walter then says how Misty, her judgment gets a little cloudy when it comes to the Yellowjackets, which I think is totally a fair point, but also with this whole interaction right here, Walter does seem a little suspicious. So then Misty says, you know what, you're right. You ended up cloning Lottie's phone, right? And so he ends up going to get the phone, comes back, and Misty ends up tricking him to leave it with her because she says, oh, I'm missing some of those little chocolate shavings in my drink. Can you go get me some? And as soon as he leaves, which I thought was maybe a little bit too easy there, but he leaves, and as he's gone, she goes through the phone, and you see that she sees something on that phone. Now, I'm assuming that's probably Lottie's killer. And so she sees that. By the time he comes back, she's gone. And so do you think that was what was on the phone? And if so, then obviously Walter probably saw that, right? So why has he been hiding it? Then we go over to Van. She comes back into Alex's house, and when she comes in the house, she finds Tai passed out on the floor, and we see Melissa crawling around, finds out that she ended up shutting the vent, so you had all the smoke from the fireplace. And so she takes Tai, brings her outside, and as she's trying to get her to come back to start breathing again, we go inside of Tai's mind, and you see evil Tai pick up a phone, but then the good Tai comes over and tells her to put it down, and then those two start going at it with each other. And then we see Van. She ends up going back in the house for Shauna, and then she grabs a knife as she's in there. Then we jump back into the 90s timeline again, where we see Nat, Mari, and Akila. They're out there, and Mari asks, why aren't they here yet? And then at that point, Jen and Melissa end up showing up, and they tell them that something happened, and they explain the situation that went on. And just the emotion and the acting from Sophie Thatcher here, I thought was top notch. She's becoming one of my new favorite actresses to watch. Any product that she's in, definitely check it out. But I thought that she was great here. And then a little bit later, you see it starting to snow, and all of a sudden Nat sees someone coming out into the woods. So she goes over and she finds out that it's Misty. She's by the tree that we saw Van at earlier, trying to fix everything. And Misty has the transponder, and Nat sees it. Then, as the episode's coming to an end, we go into the modern timeline again, where we see Van. She unties Melissa, and Melissa says, you know, if you just leave me alone, you can end it. And Van says, but there's a chance if I kill you, then I maybe get a chance to live. And Melissa, she responds by saying to her that all those sacrifices, all those rewards, they weren't real. Van, you're a good person. And Van, she tries to kill Melissa, but she can't. And then Melissa ends up killing her, and as she does, she says, isn't this what it wants? And then we see Van. She's on the plane, and she's watching her death play out, and as that's happening, we see Shauna and Tai. They end up coming to the room, and they find out that Van is dead. And then they have a really interesting conversation, older Van and younger Van. She ends up asking younger Van, why would she send herself inside here if she knew that she was going to end up dying? And younger Van responds by saying, I didn't have a choice in the matter. This is how the story ends. And so, I just thought that was a really interesting conversation. There was a little bit more there to the combo as well. What do you guys think of that final conversation? And I know I kind of had a feeling, just with how sick Van seemed to be getting, that we would maybe lose her. But man, we are losing a lot of people in season 3. I know they had talked about that in interviews, just saying that there was going to be a body count for season 3, but I wasn't expecting to lose this much, especially if there is going to be a 5-season plan. I'm just curious how they're going to kind of play that out, where we've been losing so many people. So definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts. Were you surprised by Van's death? Leave your thoughts, comments down below. Again, if you guys are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button as well as the bell button next to it. That way you guys get notifications for all my new videos. Give this video a thumbs up, as it really, really helps with the engagement. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you next week for the season finale. Buzz, buzz.